Good evening. If there can be one group of people of which it can be said they never learn anything from movies, it's the people who open up sarcophagi to look at mummies. Because we watched two mummy movies today, this and one from, I think, the 50s, or when was it from? Um, yes, 1959. And, uh, and then the one represented here on the front, although this is Boris Karloff, and the mummy was not played by Boris Karloff. But the point that I'm making is the movies are always about don't disturb the mummies or there will be a curse. And between the last mummy movie, this mummy with Karloff, that I watched, I think about a week ago, and watching this one, someone somewhere, I barely paid attention to the story, but a sarcophagus was opened so that a mummy could be looked at between mummy movies, between my watching mummy movies. That happened. It still happens. People still, apparently, they have to open. Why? What's the point? It maybe somebody will one day explain to me what can be learned from actually opening these things and looking at the dead bodies, but I don't get it. And I think that of all the monsters, the mummies, they've got a point. They're making they've made their argument well. But there are a couple other movies, including that Mummy from the 50s. Tonight's main event was The Mummy's Hand, but we also watched the other Mummy movie, and before that we watched other movies, and before that I watched movies. Um, so my first one was the Gods and Monsters movie that I previously mentioned about James Whale, who directed the first two Frankenstein movies and also The Invisible Man, among other things, including Showboat. It's very good. Ian McKellen got an Academy Award nomination. I don't think he won. Um, I can easily look that up, but then so could you. Brendan Fraser is very good, and you got actors portraying Boris Karloff and Elsa Lanchester, and it's interesting. It's semi-fictitious, but you could still learn some stuff from it, and they recreate the filming of one of the iconic scenes from The Bride of Frankenstein, so that's a lot of fun. Um, I then watched Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and I think I'm justified. There are a couple of people who turn into monsters in that over the course of that movie. The first two together movies that we watched were the Disney version and the Tim Burton version of Sleepy Hollow, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Both very good, both very different. The Tim Burton version is kind of like The Raven with John Cusack, where it takes a literary figure and turns him into a detective. And the Disney version, which is paired with The Adventures of Mr. Toad from Toad Hall, The Wind in the Willows, which is not quite Halloweeny, but it's fine. The but the Sleepy Hollow, the Disney Sleepy Hollow, it's kind of a funny musical, um, and yeah, it's an iconic one. It's one that a lot of people know. Maybe it's probably the most famous. I'm not no expert on Sleepy Hollow adaptations. I just know that these are the only two I ever hear about. But I know that there are more because I saw one at a library sale once. Um, there are videos that I made when I was in Sleepy Hollow last year. See, we watched these instead of going because we can't go because we don't want to get on a train right now, even though it's a very short trip. But last year we went, and I took a little bit of video of the church there, the old Dutch church, and this beautiful sculpture of the Headless Horseman. And I read relevant passages from the book. And it's a very good and very short book that you can read. But those passages are elsewhere on the YouTube. Maybe one of them will appear here toward the end. Let's see, and then after that we actually had some extra time, so we watched episode 2 of the Stephen Moffat Dracula, and it was interesting because it elaborates on one of the most interesting unexplored parts of the novel. And usually I think, and I would say, the novel is fine. It does what it does and does what it's supposed to do, and you don't have to expand on it. But it was actually interesting. He goes into the ship that Dracula takes over to England, and then he goes into a completely different direction. But for the time being, it's just interesting to see how imagine how Dracula would have behaved on the ship. So that was fun. But then we got to The Mummy from 1959, in which what's it? Cushing. Peter Cushing is his name. Yes, Peter Cushing plays the main archaeologist, which is to say the young one. There are two old archaeologists, and then there's the young archaeologist who is, for some reason, early on, he's uh, laid up with a wounded leg, and so he can't be part of breaking into the tomb. I don't know why, because it doesn't. His leg injury doesn't really matter ultimately. But his father is one of the people who breaks into the tomb. His father, Stephen Banning. This will come up later. Stephen. And they break into the tomb. They take the wrong thing and release the mummy, and so it goes. It was interesting to see how things were, because I've been watching the black and white monster movies, but this one is in color in 1959, colored interestingly, including Christopher Lee as the mummy in the not so proud tradition of white Englishmen playing Egyptian mummies. Boris Karloff was also white and English. Let's see, and it kind of it's purely about revenge. The neighbors have gotten home or something and started yelling again. It's that time of night. I should perhaps try to record these things when they aren't yelling, but it's not as predictable as it would seem. So yes, it's about it introduces the idea of someone who's charged with. Actually, it doesn't introduce it. I'll just go straight to this one now, because the Cushing and Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee mummy is, you can see how it's part of the evolution between the Karloff mummy, the Mummy's Hand, and moving toward the Brendan Fraser mummy, because it uses like the first Mummy movie was, and this is why I wasn't as interested in it back when I first saw it, because it's not the Brendan Fraser mummy at all, really, except the mummy's name is Imhotep, and he's in love with someone called Anck-Sunyamun. But other than that, it doesn't follow the story. It's not similar to the story. The Mummy's Hand is essentially the same as Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee mummy, at least on the surface, including the main archaeologist guy is Stephen Banning with a V. Banning. Not Steve Bannon. Stephen Banning. And then the older archaeologist in the 59 version is Stephen Banning with a PH, so maybe intended to be the same character. But in The Mummy's Hand and in the Peter Cushing Christopher Lee mummy, the mummy's name is Caris, and the princess or priestess or whoever she happened to be, depending on the movie, is Anaka, something like that. And it's the story where the guy who was turned into the mummy was in love with her in life, but couldn't be with her for whatever reason. She died. He tried to resurrect her magically, and he was turned into a mummy and charged with guarding her tomb. This is the premise of both of these movies. And both of these movies also have the guy who's charged with taking care of the mummy and making sure that nobody, or that the mummy is always able to carry out his responsibilities. In the case of The Mummy's Hand, this involves a special potion made by what's left of extinct leaves that make a potion, and every full moon you have to give the potion to the mummy just enough to keep its heart beating. And in the Peter Cushing Christopher Lee one, that's not there, but after the mummy is disturbed, the guy brings it to England to hunt them down in England. Everything's in Egypt in this version, in The Mummy's Hand, but in the later one, it comes over to England, kind of like Dracula on a ship. And in that version too, there's an accident with the crate that's carrying the mummy. on its way to being delivered to the mansion, and so it falls into a bog, and you first see the mummy coming out of the swamp like a swamp thing. Um, so there is that, and also, oh, and this whole guardian of the mummy thing evolves into the Magi in the Brendan Fraser version, and but in that case, they're trying to keep the mummy dead. They're trying to make sure nobody disturbs and wakes him up. He's not a tool of theirs. There's a strange shift in the guardian of the mummy's motivation or mission or whatever halfway through the mummy's hand, where he decides that he wants to become immortal or something. He wants to use the leaves that have been keeping the mummy going for his own nefarious. I don't know. I didn't get that. I'll watch this again and I will understand it better at a later time. Um, but that occurred to me. So it was interesting watching these two movies back to back. I was originally going to watch the '59 version back to back with the Karloff version, but it's actually better that it worked out this way, and I watched it with the Mummy's Hand. Um, let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to get to, is comparing the two, or well, I can't. I've never gotten to everything that I want to talk to within the time that I give myself here, and I think that I've gotten most of it though. So this was another interesting movie. Interesting to see how it evolved over the course of, let's see, 31 or 32 to 99 with the Brendan Fraser one. And again, I'm not really comfortable talking about the Tom Cruise one. I don't know it well enough. But over 60 years, the evolution of how mummy stories have evolved, and we're still opening mummies in real life for some reason. And if anybody wants to explain to me why it is valuable to history and knowledge to open those tombs, not even just the tombs, open the tombs, that's fine, but opening the coffins and looking at the mummies, that's the weird thing. Then, you can comment and let me know why that is actually valuable. But it was also good to watch. This is the Universal Classic Monsters Mummy, and the Peter Cushing Christopher Lee one is Hammer Horror. And there are a couple of other Hammer Horror movies that are going to be watched in conjunction with relevant Universal Classics. And it's kind of what Blumhouse is now and what Universal Classic was originally. Hammer Horror was in between. And so I'm looking forward, especially now that I've seen one. I think I may have seen one or two others in the past, but I don't know for sure. But I'm looking forward to future comparisons of like Dracula or Frankenstein, how those stories are told with these. So I'm going to leave it off now with that. Tomorrow is The Invisible Woman, and I look forward to saying things about it into the computer so that maybe somebody eventually hears them. Have a lovely midnight.